Hey guys, this is Cullen Moshman for CardsChat.com, and we're continuing on right now with me and Katie's course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days, with the topic of day 17 being turns and rivers, 3 keys to strong late street play. So by late street, we just mean turn and river, and these betting rounds come up less often. Like we said before, every single hand you're going to play pre-flop. Flops are very common too, and turn and river are a little bit less common, but they represent bigger and more significant pots when they do happen, so it's really important to get them right. And our first turn concept is you want to plan out your river decision before you get there. So that doesn't mean that you need to say, for example, okay, I'm going to call this turn and then call the king of spades and then the king of hearts. I'm going to check raise 2.5x. It means that you want to have a good plan in advance. So I'm going to call here and then I'm going to call most rivers. Or I'm going to call here and then I don't think that he's going to fire the river unless he's very strong. So I'm going to call here, hope to show down, and then check fold a lot of rivers. So have an idea of how you expect that final betting round to go. The next idea is a really, really important one, which is that if you have the betting lead and you're not sure what to do, then continue betting at the turn. So if you don't have the betting lead, that would mean, for example, that you call a raise pre-flop, then you check call your opponent's flop continuation bet, and then you're normally going to check the turn to him. Whereas if you have the betting lead, you're going to tend to have more fold equity, you can represent more hands, and betting can have a lot of benefits. For example, you can get your opponent to fold a better hand, particularly with the draw, which is so important. We've made it its own bullet point. You want to bet most of your decent draws at the turn. Now, why do we say no showdown value? Because if you do have showdown value, then it makes more sense a lot of the time to check and call, to play more of a pot control approach, because you can still win even if you don't bet. Whereas if you have no showdown value, you can only win this pot by improving or betting, and that's why betting is so much more powerful in those spots. What are some other reasons to bet the turn? Well, also protecting your hand. So you can bet with a probable best hand so that you charge draws and other worse hands. You can bet for equity denial. You think most of the time your opponent doesn't have a very strong hand, but pretty much any hand is going to have 6 outs to pair and maybe a gut shot, stuff like that, so that your equity will go up from something like 75% to 100%. Also, it just makes you tougher to play against if you're somebody who's continuing to apply a lot of pressure rather than starting to freeze up a bit more and play a little more passively or neutrally on the later streets. So those are going to be 2 really important turn concepts. And let's look at river play. So the first one is to switch into bluff catching mode. What does that mean? It means to call bets. So we talked before on the fundamental river question about reasons to bet, okay, for value or as a bluff. But there are also reasons to check. And the main reason to check and call is if there are a lot of busted draws, then the only way to win more money from your opponent is to allow him to bluff and to give him some rope to hang himself. So if, for example, there's a pretty coordinated flop and your opponent has called the flop and then maybe the turn gets checked and he no bets out the river and he has a lot of busted draws to be playing this way, then a ton of the time what you're going to look to do is to pick off his bluffs. Now the other thing is that when you have the best hand and you're confident of that, or at least you think that it's strongly likely to be the case, you want to give real consideration to value betting. Winning poker, like we said before in the value betting specific section, is the most important at the river, is about making good hands and getting max value for them. So never just be glad that you've made it to showdown. A common situation where people do that is, let's say, for example, that they river top pair and it's a pretty big pot and they think it's the best hand, but they're just so happy that they can now check it back and probably win that they don't bet. You never want to freeze up like that. If you think you have the best hand, then you want to give strong thought for betting it for value, like we talked about in the previous section. Now, the opposite of the value bet is, of course, the bluff. And bluffing is not as important as value betting. It's not going to be as key a component of our strategy. But with that said, If you're pretty confident you're not going to win at showdown, then you should bluff, at least most of the time, if you can actually represent some kind of decent hand and your opponent is capable of folding. So to start with that second point, if your opponent's like a maniac or a total calling station, it's fine to just literally never bluff him. Or with the first point, let's say that you continuation bet and then you check back the turn even though there are a lot of draws. Your opponent checks the river to you once again. Well, maybe there aren't too many strong hands you would play that way. In that situation, you don't bluff. However, again, if you are not going to win at showdown and these two bullet points apply, then definitely give real thought to bluffing. So why don't we combine these all now by looking at some hand examples. And one thing that I'm pretty psyched about is that we're now at the stage where we have so many concepts under our belt that we can be talking about a lot of different aspects of strategy at once. So these are hands that are filtered to focus on late street play, but we're going to be combining a lot of different concepts by this point of the course. So let's begin. And here we elect to call preflop. Our main play preflop should be to 3-bet and then be willing to stack off. So in other words, we put in a 3-bet to, let's say, 1700, and we're planning our hands. If our opponent shoves, we are going to call. Jacks is strong enough to do that. But here elects to call. And at the flop, what is our plan? This is probably a 2-bet situation. We have a second pair type hand with our pocket jacks. So it's going to be tough unless our opponent bluffs a lot to get paid off if 3 bets go in. So it looks like a good 2-bet situation. And we're very happy your opponent checks to us. So the question here is, what do we want to do with this turn, and what plan do we want to have? So here he's the one who has the betting lead. We only want 2 bets to go in. We should check back. And our plan is to put 1 bet in at the river. If he checks, we're going to value bet unless it's an ace or a king. If he bets, we're going to call. So that's our river plan. Here correctly checks back. This is great. Our opponent checks, and we can value bet this hand. So this is combining 2 concepts. We have decided on a river plan at the turn. So when we check back turn, we knew we were going to value bet most rivers if he checked to us. And the other thing is going after thin value. In other words, making a value bet when you don't have a slam dunk winner because you think that's very likely to be the best hand. And here, if our opponent had a queen or better, he would very likely have bet, if not the turn, then certainly the river. So we should go ahead and value bet this. That's exactly what hero does. Slightly small sizing, but that ends up having the nice benefit of getting even ace-king to call. And that's why I'm saying that value betting is so important at the river, because your opponents can and will call with a lot of very weak hands. Let's look at a sit and go spot now. So we complete in the small blind. This is a pretty nice flop for us. We can either bet right now and look to get value and start building a pot. Check call would also be fine, considering that we have plenty of showdown value and also a draw. And here at the turn, hero continues betting. And so the question I want to ask you guys is this a good spot to go into bluff catching mode? And so we need to think, is most of our opponent's range going to be draws? If so, then even though we have a very strong hand, we should look to check it to him. And if we check and he bets, of course, we're going to raise. Why not? We basically have the nuts here with our full house. But in situations where your opponent is likely to have a lot of draws, checking this very strong hand can be correct. Here, however, I would not do that. And the reason for that is he limped in under the gun, so he probably is not going to have the straight draws like 5-3 or 6-5 as much. We have 2 hearts, which makes it less likely that he has a flush draw. So a lot of the time he is going to have some kind of hand like pocket 5s or queen 10 suited. And so we should just go right ahead and continue betting for value, which is what hero does. This is good. If anything, we could bet slightly larger. But we get called, we get our full 3 streets of value, and a nice pot that hero wins. Now we'll look at Jack 10 suited. We raise and the big blind calls. So I would normally c-bet this. It's a fairly dry flop. I guess it's kind of a combination. It's not really dry or not really coordinated, but we do also have a gut shot. Most of the time I would c-bet, but checking back is reasonable. And what is our plan going to be here? So we don't have the betting lead. The flop was checked, and we also have some showdown value here. So I would probably check this back with the plan of calling a river bet. The reason why I would call a river bet is it doesn't make a lot of sense for our opponent to have a hand strong enough to value bet. He's checked the flop and turn to us. He didn't re-raise pre-flop, which makes it a bit less likely he has an ace or a king. So we should just look to showdown as cheaply as possible by calling a bet or checking back. And what do we think our opponent has? So first of all, if he had a queen, he's probably going to call if we bet. If he has worse than jack high, it's going to be difficult for him to call. So there aren't too many benefits we have of betting, but even so, we expect to have the best hand more than half the time. And he has a counterfeited pair of sixes. Another example, here raises ace-king. So this is a pretty classic c-bet decision. Should we c-bet here? The answer is no. This is a very coordinated flop we've completely missed. So we'll be looking to check this back, which hero correctly does. And now I would also check this back. We're not worried about protecting our hand. If he has a spade, he already has his beat. If he doesn't, then we're very likely to win this pot. So check back, and this is a good time to bluff catch. So plenty of the time our opponent just has absolute air here. But at the same time, if he checks and we bet, it's too difficult for him to call with a worse hand. So if he bets, we should tend to bluff catch. If he checks, I would just check back and hope to show down our top pair. So well done play by hero. Another example, we have pocket nines. Hero puts out the continuation bet. And what do we want to do here? Do we want to check or bet? So this is a situation where we do have the betting lead and we're deciding whether or not to bet the turn. If you bet here, that is completely fine. So one reasonable plan would be to bet this turn, and then if we hit one of our two gut shot straight draws, so we have 4 outs to a 7, 4 outs to a jack, if we hit one of those, then we value bet river, and otherwise we check back. That is a completely legit plan. Most of the time though here, I would actually check back this turn for the reason that we have a combination of draw and showdown value. We can absolutely win this pot without improving, which is going to make us a little more inclined to check and set a bet. So both reasonable options. We'll see what hero does. He checks. And on most blank rivers, then one bet is going to go in. Our plan will be to value bet, for example, a deuce, call if he bets. And on this river, we don't want any bets to go in. If he bet it, we would just give up. And when he checks, we're going to happily check it back. Example from an MTT, here raises with 9-8 suited, the big blind calls. And both checking and c-betting are fine options here. Most of the time I would put out the continuation bet, considering that there are plenty of worse hands that can call. But at the same time, we do have showdown value. We do have a couple of backdoor draws. So I think that both possible decisions here are completely fine. Here it checks back. When we check back, though, we're really underrepresenting our hand. We're saying to our opponent, look, I don't have anything here. So what we should do is we should call wider than we normally would once we check back the flop. So I will call here and then call most rivers. That would be my plan. And our opponent has plenty of busted draws in his range. He could have a busted straight draw, a busted flush draw. He could be purely bluffing at us because he thinks we don't have anything after we check back the flop. So this is a good time to catch bluffs. And notice that, like in the section on pot odds, we don't have to be best half the time, okay? We're getting good pot odds. Poker Tracker displays, we're getting pot odds of almost 2.5 to 1. So we know that 2 to 1 pot odds means we need to be good 33% of the time. 3 to 1 means 25% of the time. So 2.5 to 1 makes sense about 29% of the time. And we should be good at least this often. So this is an example where I think hero makes a mistake by folding instead of looking to bluff catch. Hero now opens ace-queen offsuit, and the hijack gets called in 2 spots. Our plan is going to be to c-bet here. When our opponent donk bets, I don't mind either calling to try to keep this player in or raising immediately for value. Hero calls, which is fine. A lot of it will depend on his bet sizing. If he bets something like 80, we should definitely raise right away for value. If he bets something like 200, I'm going to be more inclined to call, in part because it's charging people more money's going in when we have high equity. So at 120, I'm probably going to be raising here the majority of the time, but calling is also fine. All right, so what should we do here? Now, even though we don't have the betting lead, to me, this is a spot where the when in doubt, bet the turn mantra works very well. Because it's a disaster if in a fairly large pot, we now give one of these guys a free card. It's very likely at least one of them has a diamond. Combined, they might have other outs, for example, to hitting straight, hitting an ace or a king. Well, king at least, because we have an ace. So I would just go ahead and bet here with the plan of betting some safe rivers, like for example the 3 of hearts, and checking back bad rivers. So that's what I would do here. I think a mistake by checking back this turn, and now we're going to give up at the river. And this is a good example where combined these guys can hit at the river deuce, a 5, a diamond, a 7, or a 5. I don't think I missed any. So that's a lot of combined outs. So we would get a lot of benefit by betting for protection. And now we're going to get to today's big quiz question. So let's move on to that. And today's quiz is going to come from a $3 45-man Synagogue. We raise. We get called. Hero puts out a continuation bet, which I like on this ace-high flop. Our opponent calls. So of these 3 possible options, which is going to be the best play and why? First one is check and fold if he bets. Next one is to check and call facing a bet. Or the last one is to bet out ourselves. So which of those 3 possible turn lines do you like the best and why? All right, so the answer here is betting out ourselves. We have a draw that's good enough that we have to continue with. If we hit a spade, that's almost certainly going to be the best hand. But at the same time, we don't really have showdown value now with our king high. So what we want is fold equity. We want to stay aggressive. So good options here. Number one, we could shove the turn. It's a bit of an overbet, but that's fine. We could also make a pretty big bet of 600 or so. Then we would have to call off a shove if he made it. But we're committing ourselves. And so it's basically going to be about the same as a shove. And then we can save a few chips on the river if he does call and we miss. So even though stacks here are a little bit awkward, betting out is going to be the best rather than check folding and giving up on our strong draw, or check calling and taking a passive line that requires us to hit our draw in order to win the pot. Lastly, I'll note that there is one option I did not give, which you could do as well, which is to check and shove over your opponent if he bets. So in that case, if he checks back, that's fine. You end up getting a free card. And if he bets, then you can shove, have some fold equity, and still be playing aggressively. So we didn't put that in the quiz. Of the 3 options I gave, I like bet the best. But notice that that is a nice creative little alternative line. So I assume that's what Hero is planning on doing. Guess we'll never know for sure. And I would now value bet this river. It's likely to be the best hand. If our opponent had an ace, he probably would bet the turn. So I would now bet 300 and look to get called by worse at this river. And our opponent did have a hand that had no showdown value, but unfortunately for Hero, he chose not to bluff it. So probably no way we could have won much more money from him in this pot. And that's going to end today's video on Late Street Play. Tomorrow we're getting to yet another very cool topic in hand reading, logic, using deduction to put your opponent on a range. So that's going to be a very fun one. And so this has been Colin Moshman on behalf of Katie Dozier and CardsChat.com for the Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days course. Thanks very much for watching.